Tuvalu is a small island nation located in the Pacific Ocean. Tuvalu is unique in that it is one of the smallest nations in the world, a cluster of islands with a total population of 10,500 spread out over about 10 square miles. On average, each person in Tuvalu emits about 1 ton of CO2 in emissions annually as compared to the US, which emits 16.21 tons per capita. Despite making up such a small percentage of the world's population, land area, and emissions, it is small nations like Tuvalu that bear the brunt of environmental crises created by other nations. Tuvalu has the second lowest average elevation, behind the Maldives, at an astounding 15 feet above sea level. As a result, hurricanes and other disasters can result in incredible amounts of damage, such as the 1972 Cyclone Bibi, which destroyed 90% of all structures in the nation. In 2015, Cyclone Pam wiped out 90% of Tuvaluan crops, as well as most of their freshwater sources. As we see an increase in tropical storm frequency, it can be expected that Tuvalu will suffer greatly as a result. Climate change experts have predicted that the world will likely see a sea level rise of 8 to 16 inches in the next 100 years. And this would be catastrophic for island nations such as Tuvalu. This would leave a majority of the island nation uninhabitable and would result in much less accessible freshwater sources. Climate change may seem like an issue which is still in the future, but this is simply not the case. If one looks closely, they can see the impacts already taking shape. Already, there's been an increase in saltwater pooling on the land of Tuvalu. There are documented cases of saltwater bubbling up through the porous rock of the island during high tide. These can be expected to expand as sea levels rise. In the last decade, the government of Tuvalu has been forced to dredge sand to fill in some of these saltwater pools in order to protect the freshwater source of Tuvalu, as well as prevent loss of land.
Climate change and rising sea levels are affecting larger island nations as well, such as my home, the Bahamas. Island nations heavily rely on coral reefs for protection from floods, hurricanes, and natural disasters. Coral reefs surround our islands and serve as shock absorption from large waves. Scuba diving over the years has allowed me to see the degradation of our reefs in real time. The destruction of our coral reefs has worsened in hurricane seasons by increasing the intensity of hurricanes as seen by the most recent hurricane, Hurricane Dorian. Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas September 1st, 2019, and hovered above the Abacos for 3 days. Growing up witnessing hurricanes includes watching them tear apart my neighborhood, diving to the bottom of the pool to retrieve shingles torn off from our roof, and the steady repair of the wall between my house and the neighbors that a tree tore down. Witnessing hurricanes now is hearing the cries of Bahamians as islands become flooded, hearing that my father's pediatric practice on another island was wiped out, hearing the cries of my people mourn the 70 Bahamians we lost to the hurricane, and the loudest of all, hearing the silence and the stillness of my country as we sit in shock, taking in what's left of our islands.
While the United States is one of the largest contributors to climate change, it does not suffer the full consequences of its actions. Many island nations and other small countries near the coast have the real fear of going underwater. It may not seem as severe or drastic in the United States, but climate change and rising sea levels have real implications in the United States as well. Hurricanes and other storms are happening more frequently and with greater intensity all around the world. Far too often, the outdated infrastructure implemented to protect cities from these events is not able to withstand current storms. One example of this is Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, a Category 3 hurricane. It completely decimated the city because the infrastructure wasn't equipped to handle these powerful storms. Damage from Hurricane Katrina is still felt by the city of New Orleans, as repairs have cost over $125 billion, and approximately 1,800 lives were lost. Not taking the levee into consideration, the stormwater system was not equipped to prevent nor subside the excessive flooding that was seen in the days after the hurricane. To make matters worse, the USA Army Corps of Engineers is the only federal program that recognizes future flood risk in its operations.
Not only is the United States suffering from increased storms and flooding, but there are cities and states within the United States that will disappear and shrink due to the rising sea level. The state of Maryland, for example, estimates 1.4 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and 3.7 feet by 2100. Approximately 172,000 acres of land in Maryland are at below elevations of 3.3 feet, which make the area at risk of drastically shrinking within the next several decades. Some success was made during the Obama administration to reduce impacts of rising sea levels and climate change. This was done by proposing new policies that created an extra margin of safety on new buildings and other infrastructures being built on or near floodplains. These measures, as well as the Paris Agreement and the Green Climate Fund, were quickly abrogated once the Trump administration took office. This can be a huge problem because there are no federal state standards that specify the rate of sea level rise. As a global leader, the US would need to start taking charge of this issue if it wants to see any change. The fight against the rising oceans isn't looming ahead of us anymore. The wave has reached shore and the damage is only beginning to show. It is up to nations like the US to undo the damage they have wrought to save countries like Tuvalu and the Bahamas, but also themselves before it is too late. Inaction is giving into destruction, and insufficient action is basically fruitless. Drastic action needs to be taken now to prevent the further rising of oceans and save countless lives.